Hey there, welcome back to Beyond the Park. My name is Adam Yaris, and I'm so excited you're joining us today for a truly memorable episode of Parks and Recreation. Today we're going to be looking at Season 1, Episode 3, The Reporter. Dun dun dun! That's the cue, the scary music sound for the record here. Now this episode brings in a whole slew of characters we get to meet. Now the episode starts off with us getting our first real experience with Jerry Gergich. He's leading this nature hike all around town, and Leslie's there with him. Now this runs into problem when Leslie eats a plant that Jerry points out, and her face balloons like a bunny rabbit on Easter, running in terror from the children. Things do not start off well for Leslie. But then we get into the real episode. Now this episode is all about us meeting this young lady named Shauna Malwae-Tweep. Hilarious name, love it, rolls right off the tongue. Feels like this is a person you have to always call their full name for the record. There are some people like that, and this is one of those. Shauna Malwae-Tweep. Shauna doesn't sound like enough. I'm right. Anyway, Shauna is going to be a recurring character here on Parks and Recreation, and Leslie's brought Shauna Malwae-Tweep. I gotta say the full name, can't forget that. Leslie's brought Shauna Malwae-Tweep in to give some good publicity to this. Getting good publicity right at the beginning of any project is the key to making it go on. So Leslie greets Shauna in the middle of the city hall and invites her to take a tour. Shauna says no, I've been here many times, but Leslie insists, and this is where we get our first tastes of how Pawnee is a brutal place to live, because it might be the least politically correct town in the world. Half of the murals in City Hall depict terrible massacres of the local Native American tribes. Anyway, soon enough, Shauna Malwae-Tweep, Leslie, April, Andy, and Ann are all sitting down together talking about the park. Now, Shauna asks Andy, kind of give me the verbal history, how did this all happen? And then we hit an issue. We run into a problem, and this is where you would hit the panic button. You see, Andy tells the story about how it happened, and we find out that he was drunk during this. He was so drunk he was trying to grab a toaster from the bottom of this pit. Now that's a problem because he has never told his girlfriend Anne that that's how he got hurt. Let me tell you something, in this scenario, that being the reason that you got hurt, that you were drunk and fell in a pit, does not bode well for your relationship. And I gotta tell you, also pretty poor publicity. So Leslie is looking, realizing this whole meeting is falling apart, and calls in Mark Brandanowitz to give a hand. Mark does the only thing he knows how, and he takes Shauna on a date. Now this gets awkward when we realize that Leslie and Mark had hooked up a few years ago. This is about to come into some romantic tension. So Leslie decides she's going to meet Shauna Malwae-Tweep at the park the next morning. At the pit. We won't know one day it will be a park, but right now this pit park is just hanging out with us. So they meet at the pit, and soon enough Leslie realizes, oh, Shauna Malwae-Tweep and Mark had a date last night. This is awkward. So Leslie panics, eventually gets to Anne's house, starts telling her everything, and apparently Andy's called that this would happen in the background. Anyway, Leslie gets over this, goes out and decides, I still have to make a good impression with Shauna Malwae-Tweep. I've got to get an article. So they sit down at JJ's Diner, have breakfast, talk it through, and apparently no one believes this park will be built. Everybody keeps saying it's not going to happen, not going to happen, not going to happen, until Leslie realizes that Mark is one of the people saying all this. So Leslie boots him off the committee. Actually, Mark resigns off the committee before he could be booted off the committee, and they wait. Now Mark does the right thing after being confronted by Anne, and goes back and talks to Shauna Malwae-Tweep, and gets her to retract some of these things. Thank God. Otherwise, that could have sunk Leslie's ship. In the end, we find out that Shauna Malwae-Tweep wrote a somewhat neutral argument about the pit. Who knows what will happen? We'll have to find out. Now in the background, we do find out that Tom and Ron play Scrabble all day long, and that Tom, for whatever reason, is purposefully losing to Ron. And that's the recap of Season 1, Episode 3, The Reporter. Now let's dive in here to the best line of this show. Now this episode is full of so many great lines, but one of them has stood out as the thing we need. Let's take a look at this fan favorite together. Our favorite line of the episode comes from Leslie when she's talking with Shauna Malwae-Tweep about the tragedies that's occurred against the local Native American tribes. Check this out with me. Leslie says, there are 10 murals here in this hallway. This is called the Trial of Chief Wamapo. It was painted in 1936, and this is Chief Wamapo. He was convicted of crimes against the soldiers. I'm always amazed at his quiet dignity right before he's killed by a cannonball. Like I said, Pawnee might be the least politically correct city in the world. Talk about a horror here. And that's the best line of the show, without a question. And this brings us to some quick observations. Let's talk about some highlights of this series. The first one that we've got from this episode is the first appearance of JJ's Diner. Now, this is going to be an iconic place throughout the entire series of Parks and Recreation. So many beautiful moments are going to happen here because this is the favorite place of Leslie and Ron to go out and get some breakfast food. Don't forget about JJ's. Second quick observation is the no food protocol. This is the moment where we get to see Leslie in her natural environment getting some breakfast food. This is the second thing that we've got for her for breakfast, and we see a good plate of waffles loaded with whipped cream. Now, we know back in season 1, episode 1, that we saw Leslie with pancakes, but waffles are her true food home. It's the place where she feels the happiest in the world. Keeping track of it, we won't forget her food in all of this. Our third quick observation, and we've got a lot of observations today, this episode is full of it, is the raccoon situation in Pawnees. The raccoons apparently have taken over part of the town, and they are going to be returning guests throughout the entire series. Like we said before, Pawnee is not an easy place. We would all much rather live right next door in the friendly town of Eagleton. Our fourth quick observation is the recurring name change of Andy's band. He said it in the episode, we used to be 3-Skin, now we're 4-Skin. Now, we all know if you've seen this series that 4-Skin won't be the last name for Andy's band. In fact, they are going to one day be called Rat Mouse, and then Mouse Rat, and then Rat Mouse again. And last but not least, we have a fifth quick observation. Today we get to meet the Wamapoke Indians, the local Native American tribe that have been brutally harassed by the city of Pawnee since its inception. We're going to note throughout the entire series how there are always pictures or different moments where there is clashes between the town and our local Native Americans. It is a recurring theme, and we often see how terrible the Pawneeans were to the locals around them. And this takes us today into our next segment of going beyond the park. Boom. Now, this episode is fascinating to me for a number of reasons. Leslie as a character is just fascinating to me. But what gets me about this episode is how Leslie keeps going even though the world around her is just falling apart. You know, she has this passion for this project, but even the people that are on her team seem to not be able to really support her. In the episode, we see Andy and Ann kind of get in this fight because Ann doesn't know that Andy fell in the pit because he was drunk. It kind of lowers the actual danger level of all of this. On top of that, in the episode, we see Shauna Malwae-Tweep bring out a notebook full of quotes saying how unlikely this pit is to be made. In fact, Shauna Malwae-Tweep says even one person said it is more likely that leprechauns exist than that this pit will ever be turned into a park. Leslie is surrounded by people that just either don't believe that she's capable of doing this or unwilling to support her because they got their own stuff going on. But Leslie will not quit. Even when the world is trashed around her, even when the raccoons are coming in and there might not be enough whipped cream at JJ's, Leslie is ready to keep pursuing her dream. And that takes us beyond the park today. You know, we all face discouragement, some of us more than others. I actually used to know this group of middle schoolers who would every week come in and critique what I would wear. Had to dress up one day of the week and kind of look a little fancier, and they would always point out, hey Adam, you don't match here, or you look a little off there. And every week I would feel broken by this. You know, I was a grown man. I was like 22, 23 at the time, but I was still sensitive. I was like, oh gosh, I wish I could just get away from these haters bringing down my wardrobe choice. You know, we are always surrounded by haters, though. Somebody might be bringing us down, throwing discouragement at us. You know, we face haters in sports, in school. Sometimes we even face haters within our own family or from our bosses. The world has many people around us that are just bringing us down and kind of discouraging our dreams, even if that's not what they meant to do. That's what it feels like. It feels like we could be trapped by that. And sometimes even when we give our 100%, it feels like we're missing out on something. You know, I wish we could get rid of our haters, but since we can't, what can we do? Well, there's the story of a guy named Paul. Now, Paul actually reminds me a lot of Leslie. You see, both Leslie and Paul were some of the hardest workers I've ever seen. And of course, Leslie's fictitious, but she's a hard worker. Anyway, they both have a lot of similarities. They both are hard workers, they're passionate people, they're persuasive people, they're dreamers. And much like Leslie, Paul gets hated on all the time. See, he was a guy called a missionary. That meant he started churches, he told other people about God. And many times when this guy named Paul would go to a new city, some people would like the things he had to say, they would like the kind of vision he's thrown out here, and other times they would hate him. In fact, most of the times he would be booted out of cities, people would try to arrest him, they would throw stones at him. In fact, one time he had so many stones thrown at him, he was left for dead and they thought he was gone. Miraculously, he was still alive. But one time Paul was just finishing up at a city and everybody was chasing him out, so he sat there and did the only thing he could. He went out and shook the dust off of his feet. You can't see my feet here, but maybe you can in the future. So what did Paul do when people threw stones and booted him out of the city? Simple. In quoting Pastor Craig Barnes, quoting Taylor Swift, he shook it off. He would pick himself up, shake the dust off, and move on to the next town. He was not going to stop. Why? Why would Paul keep going even though people are trying to kill him? Simple. He knew he had a mission and a purpose. He had belief that he was doing something bigger, that he was created to tell other people about God, that this was his mission and nobody was going to distract him. Nobody was going to bring him down. So he did all that he could. He got up again and again, even though he failed, even though he tried so hard, shook the dust off, and got going. Today, for some of us, that's what we need to do. You know, we have enough haters around us. We have enough people that cause us problems. What we need to do is instead listen to God, who's given us a mission and a purpose, shake off the issues, and just keep going. Because there's always going to be those haters. But we know that we have a chance to do something more. Because we have to listen and choose who we're going to let influence our lives. And the good news is when we have God doing that, we just get to shake it off and try again. And that takes us beyond the park. Thanks for joining us today. We'd love for you to like, comment, and subscribe to help support all that's going on. And we'll see you in our next episode, Season 1, Episode 4, The Boys Club. See you in a little bit.